those who are going to be doing the presentation today are representing the Accelerated Education Working Group. We're very enthusiastic that you can join us in this launch of the new guide for accelerated education programs. I'm Ash Hartwell. I'll be the moderator. And I wanted to say this webcast is brought to you by the Education in Crisis and Conflict Network, ECCN. It's a community of practice working with USAID and its implementing partners on strengthening education in conflict and crisis settings. Just a few words of introduction before we get into the heart of the webcast. Some of the background here. Obviously, you're aware that there's a sharp increase in the global concern for out-of-school children and youth in areas affected by crisis and conflict. The new global platform, Education Cannot Wait, was just launched last week at the humanitarian conference in the summit in Istanbul, and now with UNICEF as the host for that initiative, it aims to reach more than 13.5 million out-of-school children and youth living in situations of crisis and conflict with quality education over the next 5 years, and ultimately by 2030, reaching 75 million out-of-school children and youth. So it's within that context that the importance of accelerated education is situated. The fact is that in protracted crisis and conflict-affected areas, children are often unable to access or continue schooling, and therefore dropouts are high. There's therefore a really pressing need to provide alternative paths to education in these settings. And in the last 20 years, there's been a growing number of agencies and organizations that have developed accelerated education programs, alternative paths into education to serve those who are victimized by crisis and conflict. However, there's a problem that there's really a proliferation and fragmentation of accelerated education approaches within the same countries and regions, often offered by different organizations and agencies, including local NGOs. There are no widely agreed guidelines or standards to assist those working to reach these children and youth with effective education programs. And the Interagency Accelerated Education Working Group, therefore, seeks to provide this guidance based on the best practice that we can draw from those organizations which have been doing this difficult work over the last 15 to 20 years. This webcast is the launch of the guide that the group has developed. The webcast will feature, and I'll introduce Martha Hewison of UNHCR, who's the chair of the working group, and she will describe the origins and objectives of the Accelerated Education Working Group. And Kate Radford of War Child coordinated the development of the Pocket Guide on behalf of AEWG, working with a team of consultants, and she'll describe the research and the approach that was taken to produce the guide. And then James Laurie, Senior Education Advisor at Save the Children, will, with Martha Hewison, highlight the 10 principles of the Pocket Guide. At the end of the presentations, we invite you to submit questions using the webcast chat function that was described on the prior slide. And we'll have a question and answer period following the presentations. In the event that we're not able to answer all your questions, and that could be quite likely since there are about 150 of you, we will seek to respond to those questions subsequently using the ECCN website. And so with that, let me now turn over to Martha Hewison, who will tell us about the origins and the objectives of the Interagency Accelerated Education Working Group. Martha?
So good afternoon from Tanzania. I'm not sure what time it is wherever you are, but just to welcome you to this webcast. My name is Martha Hewison and I work for UNHCR. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Accelerated Education Working Group. The Accelerated Education Working Group is an interagency working group of education partners working in accelerated education. It's currently chaired by UNHCR, and it has representation, as you can see from the slide, from Save the Children, UNICEF, NRC, IRC, USAID, War Child Plan, INEE, ECCN, and UNHCR. We are planning on extending the membership, and we'll talk a little bit about this at the end of the webcast. So why do we have an Accelerated Education Working Group? As Ash has just said previously, Accelerated Education programs are employed with more and more frequency to address the overwhelming numbers of out-of-school children and youth. And whilst there's widespread agreement on the need for such programs, we found there's really insufficient validated documentation that provides any kind of guidance, standards, and indicators. And also there's very little documentation on the impact of accelerated education programs and how successful they are in contributing to learning achievement or into transition into the formal sector. So to address some of these challenges, starting with the lack of guidance and standards, in late 2014, UNHCR invited a small number of education partners to form the Accelerated Education Working Group. So what do we do? The Accelerated Education Working Group meets biannually to share experiences and expertise in accelerated education, and really it provides an opportunity for dialogue around a more harmonized, standardized approach. And based on this, as Ash said, we've started to develop some materials, and this is the launch of the Accelerated Education Pocket Guide. And these materials are based on international standards and sound practice for AE. You can see here on the slide our objectives. And then just to let you know a little bit about what we're working on this year, we've worked on an agreed set of definitions for accelerated education, and these will be uploaded onto the INEE term bank very soon. We've worked on an agreed set of accelerated education principles, which James and I will talk about later on in this presentation. We've been collecting some case studies and best practice in accelerated education and coordinating some research. And then towards the end of this year, we're going to try and develop a template or a guide for costing, an example of elements and methodology for costing. We're also trying to develop a generic list of indicators for AE. And lastly, what this webcast is all about, we developed a pocket guide around accelerated education. So with that, I'll pass on to the next presenter, Kate, and she will talk you through a little bit about how we developed the pocket guide.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming and hearing from us today. How did we develop the pocket guide? I'll just quickly move the slide. I guess the first question is, why did we develop the pocket guide? I think what we found is when we started to talk to our members that there were a lot of half-made guides, manuals, etc., but there wasn't one thing that we really thought that would be of value to practitioners, that could be a go-to reference that would provide some very good principles and practices on which the whole of the sector could base its work, and we could also have some better coordination within the sector. In terms of who we really thought this guide could be for, first and foremost it is for practitioners. And I'll tell you a little bit about the process of developing it and what's going to come, and then you'll hear a little bit more about how we believe we can make sure that it really works for practitioners. It's also, we believe, going to be quite useful for donors and also evaluators in being able to review proposals, being also able to review work against an agreed set of guidelines and an agreed approach. In terms of the learning process or the process for developing the pocket guide, it was really interesting, because what we did find across all agencies is that we didn't quite have an agreement. So our poor, very talented but very patient consultants, EENet, had to spend a lot of time as we went back and forth, and we really used this as an opportunity within the group to come to a broad consensus about what are good principles, what is achievable, what is aspirational, and for what is aspirational, what are the steps for actually reaching the goals that we set ourselves as a sector. What we also wanted to be quite clear about is not only what's important, but how do you communicate it? And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Just making it really, really clear. We've now got to the point where we have what we believe is a pocket guide, which is a very good start. And what we really want to do now is two things. One is to actually start to send the pocket guide out to expert reviews, to people who have long experience in the field, but also to actually do some practitioner testing in country. And Martha, at the end of this presentation, will be asking you out there if any of you would be interested in actually field testing the guide for us. We want to make sure that it's robust enough and also that it's fit for purpose, as it were. Based on that, we'll take that then, make any changes that we need to do in the guide, and hopefully we'll come to a fairly good final product at an end. And I think the message I want to give to you is it's a process in order to get to a broad sector agreement, and also to develop something that is really useful for everybody who's actually doing the work out in the countries where we work. So what does the pocket guide contain? Well, as you'll hear a little bit more about from James, we've centered the pocket guide around what we see as the 10 principles of good practice in accelerated education programming. Within those 10 principles, we set out some key definitions. As Martha said, those definitions have been agreed with INEE, approved by INEE, and will also be taken up into their definition bank. Combined with that, we've put what we see as the essential must-have information for practitioners in the field, some recommended actions based on good practice, some very important indications of challenges and points to consider, and also some examples and case studies. For those who are particularly interested or need further support on one area, there's also a very nice list of suggested reading and other places you can go to for further information. So yeah, we're quite proud of what we've done, but so we're really going to be interested in hearing about your feedback at the end. And just to go back to what comes next is the field testing. And after that comes hopefully the final guide. What I'd really like to do now, and I guess this is where the real meat is of the presentation, is pass you over to James, who will start walking you through the 10 principles that we've agreed upon. Here we go, James.
Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk you through the first 6 of 10 principles that we've developed. To firstly say though, these principles were developed in South Sudan, and they were originally a list of 20. From that list of 20, we tested them on a program in South Sudan, and they later became 14, then they went to 12, and then we went to 10 through the work of the Accelerated Education Working Group. So quite a lot of intellectual investment has gone into refining these principles, so they're fit for purpose, so they're elegant, and so they really go to the core issues. And I think one of the things we need to emphasize is the difference between essentials and desirables. These 10 principles are the essentials. You may see them as still aspirational, but we see them as the essentials. They do not include the desirables. And there's many desirable things you can include in an accelerated education program, but we're really going to the things that really fundamentally matter, the foundations. So fewer bells and whistles, more the things that we think are really fundamental to helping children learn. So we hypothesize that when you put these 10 together, when you put them together diligently, you're going to see learning gains for children. That is our hypothesis. We're going to be testing it over the coming years. As we said, these are based on good practice, they're based on evidence, but we want to see what really happens through research and through experience, see what happens when we put them together. So there's 10 principles. Principle 1 and Principle 2 concern the learner. Principle 3 to 6 concern the system or the policy level. 7, 8, and 9 concern the Accelerated Education Centre, and the Principle 10 concerns the programme. So, keeping it simple was fundamental from the beginning. We have tried to keep it simple. We might be able to simplify it more in the future, but we maintain we are just trying to keep it simple at this stage, focus on the 10 most essential things. Principle 1, and the wording of the principle is important. AEP is flexible for older learners. So older learners, typically 10 to 18-year-olds. Now, this is not to say accelerated education isn't suitable for adult education. It is suitable for adult education. So anyone over the age of 18 is an adult. We're talking about children, 10 to 18-year-old children. We also are stating within this guide that accelerated education is less desirable and less suitable for younger children who ideally will be integrated into a standard education system. The second word, flexible. There's reasons why people are out of school, and there are barriers to their entry into schooling. And where possible, the accelerated education program should be flexible to meet the needs of the individuals who will be participating in the learning. So some key things we can be doing is helping authorities, helping education systems, helping ministries of education define a suitable age range for their context, and helping them and working with them to ensure those sort of age, and that the principle of age is an important factor, because I'm sure many of you who work in the sector will have seen adults, 24, 25-year-olds, even 30-plus-year-olds, sitting next to a 14-year-old in an accelerated education class. This is not acceptable, and this is something that we need to change. And I'm sure many people in this webinar will have seen that taking place in certain locations. A few other important things, the importance of bridging courses to help children enter the accelerated education, to ensure they have the necessary language or literacy skills. And also, when it comes to that word flexibility, looking at class time and location. Critical factors. Let's move on. Principle 2. An AEP is a legitimate, credible education option that results in learner certification in primary education. Accelerated education programming is a system to help children gain a primary education. Now, for this to be achieved, there needs to be an understanding, a relationship with the people with the authorities who accredit primary education, who give children the opportunity to sit an exam and pass the exam, have the exam marked, to pass it, and then to be certified as having passed primary education. This is important. Now, so in some situations, we have found accelerated education programs have not had that suitable link to primary accreditation. So making sure that link is present is critical. Linked to that is the pathways for student accreditation, so that there are links onto secondary education. The idea is you can enter into a formal secondary education system having achieved a primary certificate through an accelerated program. Making sure that those examinations are accessible, and making sure the examination is harmonized with the formal system. Let us move on. Principles 3, 4, 5, and 6 relate to policy level and system. AEP is aligned with the national education system and relevant humanitarian architecture, or relevant to humanitarian architecture. For the AEP to run successfully, I think the organisers of the AEP, the people who are supporting the Ministry of Education or the educational authorities in running the AEP, they need to know about out-of-school children, know where they are, know whom they are, and have some relevant data on to ensure that the AEP is situated in a relevant location. Working with the Ministry of Education is critical. And where possible, the external actor, often an NGO, but not exclusively, will need to partner with and influence national authorities to ensure that there is good connections. Budget provision for AEP is also quite critical, and often we find that where kind of non-state actors, it's effective and it's important that non-state actors can partner with the Ministry of Education to ensure there's necessary budget available as well. And importantly, in humanitarian settings, working with the education cluster or the other relevant humanitarian body is critical. Principle 4. Curriculum, materials and pedagogy are genuinely accelerated. Accelerated education suitable and use relevant language of instruction. This is a critical point, and this is something that this is one of the areas where from our review of accelerated education work, we see weakness. There's lots of curriculum, there's lots of materials and pedagogy, but they are not always genuinely accelerated nor suitable for accelerated learning. And so we need to ensure that the teacher guides are suitably accelerated, that the curriculum, which is a primary curriculum, is suitably condensed and made accelerated education ready. And also the pedagogy, the way that teachers teach, is suitable for accelerated education and suitable for those 12 to 18-year-olds typically. And another point about curriculum is the emphasis on literacy and numeracy and PSS psychosocial support. Principle 5. Educators participate in continuous professional development. We know that the teachers of accelerated education classes are often qualified teachers. They are sometimes para-teachers or contract teachers who are kind of teachers who teach in the formal system but aren't necessarily qualified or certified. And sometimes they are people or individuals from a local area who do not have a teaching background. They are often people who have not had the benefit of a decent education themselves. So the educators in accelerated education work need to have continuous professional development. And that word continuous is critical. It's not just an induction class at the beginning. It needs to include an induction class at the beginning, but it is not just the induction class at the beginning. And it is a program of support and not just ad hoc or one-off training. So where possible, we want accelerated education teacher professional development to align with national teacher standards. Where possible, we want it to include pathway certification so that accelerated education professionals gain suitably accreditation for their work. The importance of inclusion, gender sensitivity and protection practices need to be included in the form of teacher professional development. And as we know, two critical issues for teacher professional development or for good teaching is the suitable knowledge of the subject and the didactic or pedagogical practice, the methodology. And when teachers have a decent methodology, have a decent subject knowledge, they can usually teach to a satisfactory standard. So principle 5, good AEPs will have decent CPD or TPD. The next one. Now this is where we make a separation between teacher development and teacher management. Principle 5 is about teacher development, improving the skills and qualities of teachers so that they can teach to a decent standard. Principle 6 is about their management, and this concerns pay, recruitment, terms and conditions, that sort of thing. So what's critical here is that teachers in AEPs are paid fairly and they're paid on time. Now, who pays them is another matter, and sometimes we know that could be a UN agency, it could be an NGO. Ideally, it is the educational authorities, it is the Ministry of Education. But we know it's not exclusively. But what is important, AEPs are functional when teachers are paid on time and they're paid fairly. Teachers are recruited locally is another critical issue. Local teachers often have greater commitment to their local area, and they can also offer greater flexibility often. And finally, a code of conduct. Important to ensure that basic standards in schools and behaviours are adhered to at all times. So at this point, I am going to pass to Martha, and who will take you through principles 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Great, thank you, James. So just to continue, don't worry, there's only 3 more, so we haven't got long to go. Principle 7, Accelerated Education Centre is effectively managed. And here we're talking about there should be a fiscal and supervisory monitoring and evaluation systems in place. Systems should be set up for record keeping, student record keeping, especially for mobile communities, to enable integration into the formal system. We should be collecting data to monitor progress on learning enrollment, attendance, dropout, retention, and transition, and this data should be disaggregated by gender, age, etc. And the Center Management Committee, for example, a PTA or a school management committee, whatever you like to call it, should be representative of the community, and they should be trained and equipped. Principle number 8, AE learning environment is inclusive, safe, and learning ready. So here we're talking about accelerated education classes should be free. There should be no charges for uniform, books, materials, etc. We should follow international or national standards or guidelines to ensure safety and quality of the learning environment. There should be access to water and separate latrines and sanitary materials when relevant. And there should also be a budget for repairs. There's a couple more around pupil-teacher ratio and reporting mechanisms in place for child protection concerns. Principle number 9, the community is engaged and accountable. And here we're saying that the accelerated education program should be located with an engaged and supportive community, and accelerated education programs, where possible, should be locally led, and technical expertise should be brought in when necessary. Comprehensive community sensitization should be provided on a regular basis, and in areas with frequent movements of IDPs or refugees, there should be continuous needs assessments and regular community sensitization conducted. And then the last principle, principle 10, goals, monitoring, and funding align. Accelerated education programs should be adequately funded to ensure sustained minimum standards, funding for infrastructure, staffing, and supplies. And we found this is a continuous problem because often accelerated education programs are in place in conflict and crisis fragile states. They often don't have adequate funding for a whole primary cycle. Data management systems should be compatible with Ministry of Education or the relevant education authority. Exit strategies and sustainability should be included in the initial AEP design. And the last one, the overarching program goal should really be centered on improving learning outcomes, access, and skills. So that's the 10 principles as they are. And now I'm going to pass you back to Ash, who will take questions.
Thanks, Martha, and James, and Kate. We've had quite a few questions, and I think we'll start with one from Brenda Bell, who asks, "What definition of accelerated are you using, and where do you find that definition?" She points out that often accelerated is understood to be merely fast-paced rather than using accelerated learning principles that lead to deeper, more meaningful learning. And so she asks that question: is what is our definition, and where do we find it? And maybe Martha, I can turn that to you because it has been a focus of our work.
Okay, thanks, Ash. So, as I said in the very beginning, one of the things we've been working on is definitions of accelerated education. So we've agreed these definitions, and they should be up on the INEE term bank very soon. But our agreed definition, I can just read it out to you, but it's actually available at the end of this webinar, is a flexible, age-appropriate program that promotes access to education in an accelerated time frame for disadvantaged groups, overage, out-of-school children and youth who've missed out or had their education interrupted due to poverty, marginalization, conflict, and crisis. The goal of AEP is to provide learners with equivalent certified competencies for basic education and learning approaches that match their level of cognitive maturity. And as I said at the end of this, the definitions are available on the ECCN, and we also have definitions for catch-up, bridging, and remedial programs. So at the end of this, maybe you'd like to have a look at those.
Okay, thanks very much, Martha. I hope that answers the question. Another question has been put by Jim Rogan of ECCN, and he asks, what research supports the good practices of the 10 principles? What's the research base? And that has been partially answered, but I perhaps could turn back to James, who spoke to this, or to Kate, who helped, manage the process of developing the guide. See which of you would like to answer that.
Okay, let me give it a go. The original principles were put together in a partnership with Sue Nicholson and Save the Children in South Sudan. The work was informed, the development of these principles was informed by a review, largely of grey literature, of evaluations and assessments of numerous accelerated education programs. And that's how we formed the original 20 principles. That work was then tested in South Sudan, and we kind of reviewed it, looked at how it works, looked at the elegance of it. And then it wasn't research that helped develop it further, it was a series of individuals who knew about this topic and cared deeply about education, who then refined them to get to the state of 10 principles. So on one level, no, they are not based on peer-reviewed academic research. The field is too slim at this stage. There isn't enough data, enough research out there for us to base it on that. There is some good research that's being done at the moment on accelerated education, which will inform the second iteration of this guide and these principles. But no, these are predominantly based on evaluations of programs and the work of experts in this sector who helped form them. That's how we ended up at the 10 principles. And over the course of the next 2 years or so, there is very much the intention that we do some research, we do understand the effectiveness of these 10 principles, which might mean some reframing, it might mean some radical changes, we don't know. But this is part of a journey rather than an end destination.
Good, thanks very much. Kate, do you want to add anything to that based on the work that the consultants have done?
I think
Whoop, we've lost you, Kate. I did want to say that the consultant group and the working group has been diligent in really surveying the field for quality research and literature that informs this work. But we realize that it's very tough to find really high quality research, and it's one of the agendas, as James said, in moving forward for us to use the principles as a basis for generating additional research and assessments. So, thank you. Next question. This comes from Sarah Press. When selecting relevant language and standards for education of refugees outside their home country, do we always assume that the home country language and standards are the most relevant? How do we ensure that refugee education aligns with some country standards? This is a tough one. The application of the guide principles to refugee populations living outside their home country. And maybe Martha, you'd like to try to answer that, given that you're with UNHCR.
I can have a go. Thanks, Sarah. I'm not quite sure I got all of it, but I think when refugees are outside of their country of origin, they should ideally be following the host country curriculum, if that's possible. And in many refugee contexts where they're able to follow a host curriculum, often there's already some form of condensed curriculum which can be used or adapted for accelerated education programs. And then if that doesn't exist, then you'd have to get some people in, I guess, to actually develop an accelerated education program from the national curriculum. So in those contexts where the host curriculum is being used, it's not really problematic to align it with the national education systems. But as we know, in many refugee contexts, they are following the country of origin curriculum. And then I guess the same applies, that we need to look at the country of origin curriculum and see if there's any accelerated education materials. If not, we need to develop one. But then I guess the really tricky thing, the really difficult thing, which actually we're experiencing in several contexts currently, is to try and work with the Ministry of Education or the national exam body in country to ensure that there's a certified equation of the country of origin accelerated education programs with the national system, so that once students complete that, they can then transition into, say, secondary education or another formal education or employment. I think one of the real challenges we often find is this accreditation and equation of host country and country of origin curriculums. I know it's very tricky, but I guess that's just something we need to work with the Ministry of Education or the relevant education authority. I'm not sure I got quite the language, but I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Martha. This is really a difficult issue. It was kind of highlighted at the Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul that many refugee camps have been in operation for many years, particularly in Africa. And so the question of which standards, which system those in the camps should follow is a difficult one, not one that we have an easy answer to. I wanted to go on to a couple of questions that have come up. One from Stephen Richardson. He asks, how does the Accelerated Working Group plan to advocate with ministries of education to accept or adopt these principles in the near future? And how could the larger accelerated education community be aware of the progress with the ministries? I'm not sure who would like to answer that one or try to answer it. That's a question for a dialogue rather than an answer.
I'll provide something of an answer to that question. It's a great question, and it's on our agenda. First caveat is we've not talked through a dissemination strategy in depth at this stage. It's something, this is part of the dissemination at the beginning of a probably a 2-year process to help the users of the intended users of the guide adopt it. And the intended users, of course, include ministries of education. They include the kind of district office staff in education. They include non-state actor staff working in the sector as well. It includes many people. The question about ministries of education, I think it has worked through partnerships between a relevant leading non-state actor, I would expect, in that location, and the Ministry of Education themselves. So just knowing South Sudan context, which again involved the work of Sue Nicholson, we, being Save the Children, partnered with the Ministry of Education, Alternative Education Systems Department in South Sudan, and we worked together over the period of 2 years or so. And we know that we can influence practice in a positive way in line with the national priorities. And we could influence the alternative education systems and the alternative accelerated learning plan, accelerated learning program of South Sudan. And so by that sort of partnership approach, I think that is how we will embed these principles into the practices of the implementers of accelerated education at a national level. That's one thing. I also think we can share the documents, we can do presentations, we can communicate, and if we rally the international community, and at the moment we're talking predominantly to donors and NGO staff, looking at the list of people on this webinar, if we can influence people and let people know that this is a useful tool to help improve quality of accelerated education, then we're hoping those people will be talking with ministries of education.
Good. Thanks, James. And I think Stephen also, and others who asked this question, recognize that there are an increasing number of governments that do recognize accelerated education within their sector strategy. And hopefully by establishing guidelines and standards, having INEE behind this, that more and more governments and agencies will begin to figure out how to embed this within sector policy and practice. That links to another question that I just wanted to mention, and that is the question that was raised by Tracy Cordone. How should AEP be financed and sustained? And I'll just myself give a short response to that, is that our expectation is that over the next 5 years, we will see more and more governments, even in fragile states, and the work of agencies begin to see accelerated education as a critical component within an overall sector strategy. And therefore, it should be financed through that sector strategy using funds, for example, that could become available if they can be raised for the Education Can't Wait initiative, as well as GPE and other sources of sector financing. That's part of the answer. But we also caution in the notes that agencies, organizations should not start programs that they can't see through beyond 2 or 3 years. The fragmentation of existing programs where programs start and stop has been a real disservice. So this is a really important question. I wanted to go to another question that comes from Carl. I'm not sure which Carl, but it's the question, is there a do no harm philosophy in the principles? Often there's a tension between accelerated education and formal schooling, as trained teachers are attracted to accelerated education programs due to regular pay and resources, or they take both jobs and are overworked. So the question of a do no harm philosophy and practice is an important one. So anybody would like to respond to that?
This is Martha. I can have a go. I don't think that they're overtly in the principles, and I think that's a really good point. And maybe we need to, you know, we think of these as not finalized and ongoing. So I think that's a very good point, and we probably need to put that in. I mean, there are some, because under each principle there's several bullets. So for example, under the principle number 5, principle number 6, which is all around educators, we talk about recruiting educators from target geographic areas, ensuring gender balance, building on learners' culture, language and experience, etc. So I guess in that sense there's a little bit of do no harm. But I think that we could be more explicit in it. So I think that's a good point. I don't know if anyone else has anything other to add to that.
Yolande Granville-Miller made an interesting comment on the experience in Liberia, where she points out that in many cases regular teachers also do double duty as accelerated education teachers and get burnt out. And that this is a really important principle in looking at the teachers and other staff connected with accelerated learning, and the whole teacher support system and recruiting and use is a vital issue. So thank you. And we may actually, in the next versions of the guide and the experience, put a little more focus on that, though it does get reflected in 2 of the principles that we have. So moving on. Andreas from the Norwegian NRC asks the question, I think it's from NRC, how are the 10 principles aligned with the INEE minimum standards? That is causing some reflection on the part of our panelists, and that's fine. Give them a moment.
Thanks, Andreas. It's a good question. And you know, having been someone who worked on the version 2 of the INEE minimum standards, I feel like I should offer a better answer than I'm about to. So I think at this stage, I'm now realizing, now you've asked that question, we haven't done a decent analysis of the alignment between the minimum standards and the guide. Now, from what I know of both documents, and I know both documents pretty well, there is a great deal of alignment. The minimum standards are obviously more comprehensive and they cover more elements, and the accelerated education guide is quite specific to one form of education. I would be surprised if there is any real difference or divergence in what they're saying. But I can't offer you a decent answer and say, yes, we've done analysis and the alignment is here, here, and here, because I don't know that's the case.
But again, that's a very useful comment, Andreas, and we'll take it to heart and be more explicit, I think, as we go forward, that the principles do align with the INEE standards. All of us are aware of those standards, but we haven't explicitly shown how they're aligned. So that's helpful. Sarah Press asks, well, Jeannie Moulton, I'm going to put the question that she's put is, how do you avoid duplicating and or drawing resources away from the formal system? It's an issue that is very hot in terms of the policy debates within the U.S. between the charter schools and the public schools. And here, more generally, how do we see that AECs do not draw resources away from the formal system?
Hi, I'll talk about that for a little bit. I think it's obviously a natural tension that does exist in terms of accelerated education and formal systems. I think what we've been very clear about in the working group is that one of the aspirations of accelerated education is to allow a transition back into the formal system when the formal system is available, and also to ensure that children are in a position to take advantage of the formal system when it's available. So I don't necessarily see it as a drain on resources, but more a way to ensure that the formal system has a better chance of being successful and being able to provide the type of education that children need, whereby children who are over age get a chance to be able to perhaps transition in at a more appropriate time for themselves. I don't think there's any easy answer because there's limited funds, as Ash has talked about. Anyway, we're not awash with funds in the sector, and certainly not in the humanitarian sector for education. But I think being very clear about the fact that accelerated education has the aim of getting children back into school eventually, where it can, is one of our principles. And I'm not sure if Ash agrees with that, because I'm looking at his very serious face across there. So I'll let him challenge that.
Well, you know, I think the issues have already come up, do no harm, and the fact that sometimes teachers are drawn from the formal system because of the attractiveness of the salaries that are provided in the accelerated education programs that are usually funded from donors, agencies, and NGOs. And so it definitely can be a problem. I think the principle of do no harm here, and looking at the relationships between accelerated education and the formal system are really important in designing and managing these programs. One of our fundamental principles, though, is that these programs are designed for children who are over age in relation to getting back into the formal system. And in our research recently carried out in DRC, we've seen that many older children and youth would like to be able to get back into the system, but they are too old to qualify to do that. And so this is where accelerated education really plays an important role. Okay, one more question. This is from Carl Triplehorn. Does the AEP research draw upon the alternative diploma programs in developed countries such as the USAID GED test in the US This would help to demystify what AEP is and how it fits into the education system. So the question is, have we paid attention to the accelerated education alternative to public programs that exist in Europe and in the U.S.?
I can have a go at answering that because it's very easy. The answer is no, we haven't. But again, I think that's something that, along with Andres' comments and looking at the INE minimum standards and comparing them to our principles, and also with the do no harm approach, I think that's something that we can definitely look at. But the answer is no for the time being.
It is no, but not a completely unequivocal no, in the sense that when we were doing the review of literature, some of the literature on accelerated education really arose in the U.S. and in Europe to examine ways in which overage children and youth who wanted to get equivalency would do that. And accelerated education, the term was originally born out of that experience. So that there's a strong and long history of the use of the term for that purpose. Good. Well, I think we're getting close to our wrap-up. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to turn this now back to Martha, who will speak to the next steps and how we would like to have you engage. I do want to say as a final word that the questions that you posed have been very, very helpful to this process. It really has been a good dialogue, and we'll take to heart not only the questions we've been able to discuss openly, but there are many other questions that we haven't, and we will seek to respond to those on the web. But Martha, let me turn back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think first of all, just to say thank you so much for joining. I'm not sure how many people are actually on, but I know it was a lot. So thanks for giving an hour of your time, and I really hope it's been helpful. And just to draw your attention to a couple of things. As Kate mentioned when she was talking about the field guide, we've done the first draft, and now we want to field test it. And so this is likely to happen probably, we want to do it July, August, and early September. So if your organization is interested in supporting this field testing and this pilot, and you're part of an AEP, then please just contact me. You can see my contact details on this slide. Send me a mail saying you're interested. We can set up a Skype because we'd really like to hear from you. Obviously, we're looking at geographically varying contexts to test it, but we'd be very open to testing it in several locations. So if your organization is interested, then please let me know. And then secondly, some of the resources that we've been talking about, for example, the definitions and the PowerPoint and the principles will be available. They're actually available on this link on the website, so you can access those. And then I can hear some children screaming. I don't know where they're coming from. They're available on this link.
Sorry, me just put it on the speaker. Sorry.
Okay. They're available on this website, on the ECCN website, and then also we'll be uploading them onto the INE website. We're actually working with INE on developing a AE thematic page, and then we're also exploring some other websites that we can put them on. So for now, we have the definitions, we have the principles. We don't have the pocket guide because that we won't put up until we field tested it. But as and when we develop other things, we'll be putting them up on this website as well as others. So please do get in touch with me if you are interested in field testing the pocket guide, and please do go into this link and try and take a look in more detail at the principles and the definitions. And I think it's up to me to thank you all once again for joining. As Ash said, we can get to some questions that we didn't answer and try and answer them on the website. And just to say thanks so much, and we hope that I guess we can all collaborate and work together in the near future.